Welcome to the State of Affairs in partnership with Serbian Radio Chicago. We are having conversations that matter, and honored to have Kingsley Cortes Wilson with me today. Kingsley is an awesome influencer. She served as the director of digital strategy for President Trump's re-election campaign in 2020. She served on Getter, which is a great social media outlet if you guys do not follow it. And also she is part of the DC Young Republicans and a Center for Renewing America. Kingsley, welcome.
Quite the introduction. Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you for being with us today. And I must say, I'm first of all so happy that you're on Serbian Radio Chicago, given that you are a Chicago native, but we all escaped our lovely city.
Yes, exactly. No, it's a shame, that leftist policies have destroyed Chicago because I was born and raised there. It is a wonderful city full of wonderful people. So hopefully we can start to change the city a bit, maybe come 2024.
I agree. It would be a great thing. The Cook County is our issue, but everything else is red. So we got to work on Cook County. Something that was brought to my attention, and we have to start with that, obviously, because we are the Serbian Radio Chicago. You posted something recently on Twitter, and it said, "Make Kosovo Serbia again." Where did that come from? Because I think now there's a huge battle happening still on Twitter over that post. But of course, you generated so much support from the Serbian American community.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think if I had to describe my politics, I believe in national sovereignty. And looking at a country like Serbia, I think that has been so abused by, these global New World Order organizations like NATO. I feel very passionately about pulling out of NATO. I think President Trump does as well. Looking at how these organizations have treated countries that just want to chart their own course has frustrated me. And I think Serbia is kind of the peak example of that, right? Of this kind of party of Davos trying to take over a country and not letting them decide who they want to be or what they want to stand for. And so I just put that tweet out, and I was super shocked with the backlash I got, but also a lot of love. And, I think Serbian Americans are natural conservatives. They're Christians, which I'm a Christian as well. And, I think that in opposing Serbia in the late 90s, the US really hurt Western Christendom in so many ways. And we really secularized the West and America to a large extent. So I think, Serbians are natural allies. I think that we should rekindle our relations. We were allies in both world wars. So there's a lot of love, I think, between our two countries. And unfortunately, just the recent kind of post-World War II global order has shied away from that. And I think that's a shame. So that's kind of what I was trying to get across in my tweet. And there's a little bit of Trumpian language there as well. So, it was a little bit punchy. And I got a lot of flack, but also a lot of love. So I just, hope that we can see increased and better relations with the Serbians in the future. And as you mentioned, I am on the board of the DC Young Republicans. We're doing a lot of different work, not just, domestically focused, but also internationally. We just met with some AfD guys in Germany. And I think it's important, as conservatives, as nationalists, that we all over the world are encouraging other right-wing movements that are jumping up, and that we're, just like letting each country dictate its own future. And I think that for us as conservatives, that doesn't just stop with our own borders. That can be, in a country like Serbia or in a country like Germany, because there's a lot of these different organizations that want to see these countries just bend the knee, right? Bend the knee to the WEF, to Klaus Schwab's agenda. And we're not about that. We want freedom for everyone.
That is so well said, and I'm so happy that you mentioned AfD. Peter Bistron is one of my close friends, and he was actually just in Belgrade recently with some of our mutual friends, including Gavin and Poso, and I understand you were supposed to go. So what happened there?
I was supposed to go. I had a congressional hearing pop up at the last second. So I blame these jerks on Capitol Hill for that, but make no mistake, I will make it to Belgrade. I was particularly wanted to see Saint Sava. It looked absolutely beautiful from the videos that I was watching, and the food looked incredible in Serbia. So I will be going there soon, absolutely.
Excellent. I'm so happy to hear that. And speaking of young Republicans, and obviously our friend Gavin had a wonderful, wonderful gala in New York with President Trump. What do you see as this movement is garnering power now in terms of the young conservatives coming up? How is the party changing, and how is that influencing the GOP essentially of our forefathers, given that now we actually seem to have a different outlook, especially as you mentioned, in terms of foreign policy? How does that affect the future of the GOP?
Yeah, I think a lot is changing. I like to call Trump the great revealer in many ways. I think before Trump, I truly didn't know how much disdain global elites had for Americans like me, right? Americans with traditional values who lived in quote unquote flyover states. I didn't know, that the Paul Ryans of the world were telling me one thing to my face and then stabbing me behind in the back on Capitol Hill in closed door meetings. And Trump, for all of his, flaws, people hate the tweets. I personally love the tweets. He exposed these people. He ripped the mask off. He showed us their true colors. And I think now people know what the deep state is, what it is truly about, how it operates. These woke and weaponized government agencies that we are funding don't believe in the Constitution. They don't believe in our values. They're actually aimed squarely at the American people. So I think Trump was really a shockwave in that. And there were ripplings early on. You saw Brexit, right? And I think you've started to see globally, and particularly when you consider Serbia as well, just a nationalist movement of sovereignty. There's no longer this idea that we need to put, this global world order ahead of national interests. And I think that's why America First is such a powerful tagline, because it so succinctly describes how each country should approach not just domestic policy, but foreign policy, as you mentioned. We should be putting our interests at the forefront, the interests of our people at the forefront. I think there are so many politicians in Washington, D.C., where I unfortunately live, that don't have the American people in mind. They're making decisions based off of lobbyists, based off of defense contractors that they can secure down the line when they eventually leave the Hill. So, I think Trump has been an incredible kind of John the Baptist in a way. He's kind of paved the way and really showed us all who these people are, what we need to do to fix it. And I think that's why it's crucial that he wins in 2024. He knows where the bodies are buried. He knows how to slash the deep state because he's seen it. He's gone up against it, and he's really going to be the one, I think, that has the capacity and the willingness to take it down. You see a lot of conservatives say things like, oh, we don't want big government. We can't do that. We can't defund that agency. Congress has to do that. Trump has the willingness to go and be creative and figure out, hey, how do we get rid of the FBI? The FBI is totally weaponized against the American people. How do we defund them? How do we combat this? So I think it really takes an outsider, not someone within the system. And Trump is that person. And so that's why I'm behind him 100%. And I think that that's what young Republicans are really starting to fight for. I think, as much as I love my grandparents and parents, their generation was really asleep at the wheel in a lot of ways. They kind of left politics to the, quote unquote professionals, and then they just took a back seat. Now we've woken up and we're losing our country. We like to say here where I work in DC, it's 11:59. The hour is late. And it's going to take young people with innovative ideas to get involved and to get off the sidelines, because I think, not a single one of us as conservatives can afford to just stay out of this fight. You need to be running for school board. You need to be protesting, volunteering, be an election poll watcher. All of us have to get involved. And I think young people really understand that kind of need for activism.
And that is a great point. And I do believe and agree with you that President Trump's greatest legacy, in fact, is waking up not just the American people, but I think the world, to the fact that there is so much corruption. and it is at every level, and it's holding up every pillar of every single society. But given that we still do have an election, or we hope, unless something happens, we have an election coming up, 2024. A lot of us are seeing it as existential. Obviously, the GOP is kind of operating on that business as usual trajectory. And we are seeing some of the debates. We see who the competitors are. What is your view on the field currently? And I have to bring it up, obviously, me sitting here in Florida, and we love Florida. We love our governor, DeSantis. We have done really well here in Florida, as we call it, free state of Florida. But was that almost a political suicide for him? And I know you have, of course, family that has been in politics for a long time. I very much respect your father. But there is a little bit of commotion there now between Trump team, which I belong to, and so do you, and then the DeSantis, who seems to be kind of leading that other flag of competitors, although we all seem to believe that they have no chance. What is your view on that?
Yeah, no, I think, you make a great point. Like DeSantis has been a fantastic governor for the state of Florida. I think he handled COVID really well. He's done a great job, defunding DEI and woke indoctrination in schools. But everyone has their ceiling, right? And I honestly believe that governor is his. I think that this race has really kind of exposed that he's not quite ready for prime time. And maybe he would have been if he would have waited. We'll never know that now, I suppose. But, I think that he doesn't quite have the it factor. And the Republican primary right now, just to be frank, has become a joke. I mean, the fact that they're still holding debates, that the RNC is still funding debates and organizing them and putting resources towards that, I think is a slap in the face to Republican voters across the country. They should be hiring lawyers and sending them all over the country to fight. All of these 2020 electioneering laws that were passed in the dead of night by the Democrats are still on the books. We need to be fighting this stuff come 2024, or, we're going to have a stolen election again. So, I think that DeSantis just doesn't quite have it in him this time around. I think the best thing he can do is drop out and endorse President Trump. President Trump has more support combined than all of the other candidates combined. Yes. So he is clearly going to be the nominee. He is the front runner. He is who the base wants. And like I said earlier, I don't think that the Trump saga is over yet. I think that he is the person that is going to finally drain the swamp. He knows how to do it. DeSantis, there's a learning curve, right? And I think people often criticize Trump for not draining the swamp enough in the past term that he had. But I think that he did a fantastic job, given just how deep and entangled the deep state truly is in the city in Washington, D.C. I think he did a fantastic job, and I think he's the person to continue it and to carry that torch. So again, I think, DeSantis has been a great governor, but I don't think he's the guy. I also am encouraged to see President Trump's continued aggressive approach toward, like I said, organizations like NATO. I think someone like Ron DeSantis has a little bit more of a neoconservative kind of bent. He kind of lives, I think, in this Reagan era, 1980 foreign policy framework that just isn't reality now. And I think when you have someone like President Trump who's willing to think outside the box, who's saying, NATO's not working for the US anymore, we need to pull away from it. Why are we paying so much for NATO? Other countries aren't pulling their weight. He's asking these questions that are disruptive and that someone like DeSantis, I think, would frankly never have the guts to ask or to do. So I'm totally behind Trump, and I think that the base is totally behind Trump as well. And I think that you're going to see a massive red wave in 2024. That's certainly what I'm hoping for. We're going to need it, because if we're going to combat the election issues that are bound to happen, we're going to need a lot of people showing up for Trump in 2024.
Absolutely. And 2024 obviously is very important, but you mentioned something that's been on a lot of our minds, and I don't want to be pessimistic. And I think it's very important for us to show up and turn up more than ever. However, the fact that nothing has changed in terms of 2020, that the lawsuits haven't really panned out the way we were hoping, how do we actually get and cross that boundary? You are in DC. What are you hearing? Because again, we look at the states that are important to the Serbian American community, where we were able to swing that vote in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania. These are those voters that actually took it away from Hillary and gave it to President Trump in 2016. And I know for a fact that more people came out in 2020, and yet they're telling us that wasn't enough, especially in those swing states. What do we do? Is it really that we're just hoping that we are going to overwhelm the cheating? Or, I mean, is there a plan? Because obviously all of us are in this together. But how do we in fact win?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think it's a difficult issue because, as I said, we have groups like the RNC that aren't necessarily focused on electioneering as much as they should be. I think, you have groups like Turning Point that are certainly more engaged in states like Arizona. And you have, I always say if we could just clone Scott Pressler and have 100 of him, we would be unstoppable. But I think that goes back to my point earlier about getting off the sidelines. Scott Pressler is phenomenal at what he does, and a lot of people can take that model and apply it in their own state, in their own district. So I really think we just need to see that sort of activism. And I do think we have to anticipate that there will be cheating. Because there undoubtedly was last time. And as I said, a lot of those laws haven't been removed. They're still on the books. And the Democrats are hell-bent on keeping Trump out of office. I mean, look, they're using all of their cards here. They're going after him with the Department of Justice. I think, people truly don't realize how unprecedented this is, that Biden is using his own Department of Justice to go after his opponent for the presidency. It is totally unconstitutional, totally un-American, does not align with our values. So I think that should sort of inspire just an overwhelming amount of support. Even if, you were a former DeSantis supporter, you're a Nikki Haley supporter, whatever it is, you have to recognize that the deep state is truly weaponized against one man, and that is Donald Trump. And he often says, they're coming after me because I'm fighting for you. And I really do think that he is the one standing in the breach, right? Without him, they're going to be coming after all of us. And we're next if we don't stand up for him and elect him in 2024. So, I think that there's a lot. And you mentioned too that there's so many Serbians in swing states. And I think that that is a big asset for the Republican Party. I think it's a big opportunity for us. As I said, you guys are natural conservatives, very Christian people. And I think that your values align a lot with the values of the Republican Party. And I don't mean, the Republican Party of the Bush years. I mean, the new right, the new Republican Party. And I think, Biden also is a natural enemy, I think, of, Serbian Americans. He advocated for NATO's bombing of Serbia and said that we should actually send troops there back in the late 90s. So he is someone who is totally bought in to this supernatural organization kind of ethos that a lot of these global elites have. And he is, I think, when you look at people who have totally ripped off the American public, I think he is the best example of that. He has, and his family, an international money laundering scheme. I mean, let's just call it what it is. If I were elected president and basically every single one of not just my immediate family, but my extended family became millionaires, the DOJ would be tapping my phone, knocking on my door. I'd probably be thrown in the DC gulag. But they have turned a blind eye to what Joe Biden and what Hunter Biden have done in China, done in Ukraine, and the way that they have just weaponized the global system to end sovereignty. I think that's really their end goal. They are afraid of nationalism and the loyalties that bind countrymen to one another. They don't want that. They want this global new world order where it's easy to control, whether that's through, organizations like the WHO, which they try to do in 2020. They don't want that. They don't want sovereignty. They don't want self-determinism. And that's really what's going to be on the ballot come 2024.
That is very interesting. And I have to ask, because given what we've been through, there was a tweet, and I mention it often, after January 6th, I believe it was on January 10th, Darren Beatty fired off this tweet that said 70 plus million Americans are now effectively Serbs of the 1990s. And I think that speaks volumes about what all of us have been through and how much we recognize what is happening in this country, given the coup and the colored revolutions and the regime change that kind of spun off in the Balkans. And we recognize it immediately here from the moment the President Trump came down those escalators. We knew that there was a coup, and the coup continues to this day. And so my question to you is, we do know where our elected officials are and how we can and operate around voting and figuring out who we elect. The problem that I see, and I'm sure you know this very well because you're now sitting in the midst of it, the midst of the swamp is the unelected permanent bureaucracy, which actually we can identify as the deep state. And I often say that Dr. Fauci, for example, is the poster child of that. The unelected, and you've mentioned the World Economic Forum, so it's not only in the United States, it is a global permanent bureaucracy. NATO is another example, Brussels, European Union. Nobody ever elected those people, yet they have so much power and they can harness it to tell us how to live, what to eat, what to drive. And that happens here as well, and it happens internationally. How do we get rid of the permanent bureaucracy, especially given DC and the power they have to weaponize these agencies against the president, against the American people, and we have no recourse? How do we get rid of them?
Yeah, I think again it takes an outsider, because when you talk about the uniparty in the United States, what that really means is what you're mentioning here, those unelected, unaccountable, faceless bureaucrats that no one knows. And they've been working in an agency like the DOJ or the FBI or the NSA for decades under multiple administrations. And they say that's because they're a career, right? They're a career civil servant. They're just a professional who doesn't have an opinion. They're able to do their job. What they really mean is that they're fully entrenched in the swamp, and they are the deep state. And because there's been a lot of overlap, I think, in past years, not recently, but in past years, if you think back to the Bush era, there was a lot of overlap, honestly, between Democrats and Republicans. They were a lot closer, a lot more aligned, more so than the American people knew. And I think that's what Trump exposed, as I was saying earlier, just, how close-knit a lot of their viewpoints of the world were. And I think the American people weren't aware of that. But these government gangsters, I like to call them, the way that you totally dismantle them is by slashing their budgets. I think it starts with the Office of Management and Budget. You have to hit them where it hurts, which is the pocketbooks. A lot of these agencies are given millions, billions even of taxpayer dollars each year. And what are they funding? If you look at the State Department, for example, we're just exporting our woke ideology all across the globe and to countries who don't want it. We are funding pride parades in Prague, LGBTQ nights in Latvia, poetry nights in Latvia. All over the world, we have these different gender, LGBTQ initiatives, critical race theory initiatives. And again, as I said, a lot of these countries don't want it. They want self-sovereignty. They want to determine their own country's values. But unfortunately, the State Department is telling them, if you don't do this, slapped with a tariff, right? So the US is very powerful. And I think that a lot of that power, sadly, has been used for bad. We used to be, I think, a force for good. And a lot of Americans that grew up in the Reagan generation, certainly my father, have that view of America, right? The shining city on a hill that fought for democracy all around the world, that dismantled the USSR. But now I think when you look at the true global US presence, it's not a force for good. We've become the evil empire in many ways, and we're not letting countries determine their own future. We're kind of soft colonizing them, but not even a good way, right? Not even with the colonization that Christian European countries did, way back in the day. Now it is this woke ideology that is just detrimental, I think, to nations and to people all around the world. So slashing their budgets is a huge component. I also think you have to clean house. The president is the head of the executive branch, and all of these terrible agencies fall under the executive. So he has the authority to clean house at a lot of these agencies, get rid of the careers, the so-called nonpartisan folks, right? Wipe them out, fill them with American patriots who believe in the Constitution and who believe in our value system. And then also, I think, impeach the heads, get rid of these heads. I've been telling, we do a lot of work on the Hill at my organization here in DC. We've got to get rid of Alejandro Mayorkas, Christopher Wray, Merrick Garland. These are individuals that are totally weaponizing their agencies to go after the American people. They're also derelict in their duties. Many of them have lied to Congress, Wray specifically, on multiple occasions. We have every reason to oust these individuals, but Republicans on the Hill, sadly, don't have the stones to do it, and they need to find that. They need to finally stand up and fight for the American people. I put out a tweet just the other day saying, what has Republican control of the House accomplished? And I think, if you think about it today, sadly, nothing. And that's unacceptable. I talk to Republican voters across the country every day. I do a lot of travel. I've gone to a lot of Trump rallies. They are the most passionate people. They get it. They understand what needs to be done, but they're being sold out by the politicians in DC who are corrupted by the lobbyists, the special interests, and all of those folks. So, I think we really need a reckoning and we need to shake things up. And President Trump, inarguably, is the master of that.
I agree with you. And it's a great point that you bring up how the woke ideology that we're exporting replicates. And it replicates into countries that really have nothing to do with the kind of issues that we're dealing with here. And I'll give you just one really blatant and crazy, I think, example: the summer of love, quote unquote, and murder of George Floyd in Belgrade, in Ukraine, in ISIS-controlled territories, which is insane. We had women who were holding up banners, George Floyd, I can't breathe. I mean, tell me, what does Ukraine or Belgrade, city center of Belgrade, have anything to do with George Floyd? But yet we do have these NGOs that are controlled by Soros and the Open Society Fund and so many others who actually fund all of this, as you pointed out, through the State Department, through USAID, through our embassies. And the ambassadors in these nations really act as though they are occupying governors rather than just ambassadors who are representing our interests. And I have worked internationally and I have seen it myself. And it's really our listeners and our viewers, I really want them to understand what actually comes out here that we are producing and what we're putting out, and why the world effectively is laughing at us.
No,
we
exactly.
have turned into a banana republic.
Exactly. And I think the NGOs are a piece that a lot of people don't hear about often because they kind of operate in the dark. But these are really the drivers of a lot of this stuff globally. As you said, they get funding from the State Department. So American taxpayers are in effect subsidizing what all of these NGOs are doing around the world. And they're not only making the world, believe in things like critical race theory or LGBTQ propaganda. What they're also doing is bringing a lot of migrants to various countries across the world. So when you go to the southern border here in the United States, it's no longer just Mexicans coming over the southern border. When I was a young kid, it was just Mexicans, economic migrants, which I don't believe in, but it was at least contained to a single country. Now what happens is you have NGOs bringing, men from Senegal, Chinese nationals, everyone from all over the world. A lot of people from Muslim terror hotspots are being transported to the U.S. southern border. They're being hooked up with the cartel just south of our U.S. border, and then they're walking across. And this is the facilitation of the NGOs that is doing that. So I think dismantling a lot of these groups, again, cutting off their funding, is imperative, because we can't allow this to happen. We cannot allow, they're kind of on multiple fronts attacking sovereignty, right? They're doing it through organizations, as we've said, like NATO, like the WEF, WHO, but then they're also doing it through migration. They do not want countries to determine who comes in their borders. And what they want to do is they want to displace that founding stock so that we have more of a globalized world where there aren't these affiliations for American heritage, or isn't this appreciation for America's values. Immigrants used to come here and they used to assimilate, and that is now, I think, a foreign concept. My grandfather came from Colombia in the 70s, and he was so happy to be an American, loved our founding, and assimilated effortlessly. Now you have people coming here that, they don't want to learn English. They're given free housing, free healthcare, free phones in many cases, and they actually import their ideology. They don't subscribe to our heritage. They don't believe in our values. And that has to stop, because that is the quickest way, I think, to destroy a country, is to let in people who don't believe in it.
And so the Europeans are facing the same issue. I don't know when was the last time you visited maybe London or Paris, or for us Europeans who kind of grew up there, we can't recognize those cities any longer because, as you pointed out, they are literally imported, and all of this is deliberate, just like it is happening on our southern border. Under President Trump, I worked throughout our security system, counterterrorism, transnational crime. So a lot of this actually does happen through the Balkans, because that is that connection into Western Europe. And most of it did happen and was centered around Kosovo and Albania and Bosnia, essentially, because you did have some of those terrorist elements that still remain even today. And Serbs were effectively the first ones. I mean, after World War I, the first chopped head was in fact a Serbian head by these same elements of transnational criminals and terrorist networks that have now penetrated so far into Western Europe and into the United States. But again, we can't vet these people. They are unaccounted for in terms of who they are, where their paperwork comes from, whether they have any paperwork, and they are handed everything. And you're bringing something interesting, the replacement of the domestic populations. And there's a lot of conversation about this, because the moment you bring it up, you're racist. You are labeled all kinds of things. You're bigoted. You don't want to share the wealth. Are we facing an imminent civil war, looking at our big cities and what is happening in our big cities, and including the drugs, the fentanyl, everything that's coming through, but a lot of terrorist activity that we have followed, at least throughout my work? Are we facing an imminent civil war here in the United States and possibly within Europe?
I think it's absolutely a possibility. And I think you're seeing people in both the US and Europe start to wake up. You see what's happening in Ireland, for example. They're frustrated, and rightfully so, that their politicians are bringing in people who don't share their values, who are dangerous people, that are just wreaking havoc on their communities and taking advantage of all of their different benefits, right? It is totally offensive that I, as an American living with the Biden economy, going to the grocery store, filling up my car, being shocked by prices and skyrocketing inflation, should have to subsidize an illegal who is unvetted coming to my country, seeking to displace me and spitting in the face of my values. And you see that happening, I think, all across different countries all over the world. And it's shameful. And I think, even in cities like Chicago, you're starting to see, which is encouraging, Democrat voters kind of speak out against this. A lot of African Americans in Chicago have recently been in various videos and interviews, staging protests, saying, we don't want these people here, because the cities are overwhelmed. Cities like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, they can't contain these numbers of people anymore. They don't have the infrastructure to do it. And the feds, frankly, aren't helping them. And the people that do live in these cities, that have grown up and loved these cities for so many years, are being forced to flee. So it's truly a crisis. And, you hear the mantra, every state is a border state. I think that's never been more true than now. And so I think we really need to be sure that we're standing up against this unchecked migration and fighting back against it. And that's something that I think President Trump truly understands. And a lot of the Republican Party, too, I think understands. But these organizations, these NGOs, these international groups, absolutely, it is their agenda to replace sovereignty, national sovereignty. And, as you said, you're kind of a conspiracy theorist when you talk about the great replacement, as they call it, but it's happening. And oftentimes leftists brag about it happening, right? They say, we're so happy that we are having, more Americans that are foreign than more Americans that are born natural citizens. And so I think that, that's something we have to be alert to. It's something we have to be aware of because, like I said, there's no quicker way to destroy your country and just tear it apart than importing people in mass who don't share their values. You can't have a country if you don't have one culture that everyone subscribes to, right? There is always this notion of live and let live conservatism has always frustrated me. This kind of laissez-faire classical liberalism. There will always be one culture that dominates the public square. And you have to be sure that it is, if you're an American culture, if you're a Serbian culture, right? Traditional Serbian culture. You cannot uproot that. Everyone has to kind of agree with it. It has to be for the common good. And I think that once you take that away, that's when you really start to have some issues. And that's what we're seeing here in the United States in every state.
And I think there is something to be said about not all cultures are the same. And I think that is very evident. And I think this whole nonsense of diversity has not worked out for us because there are some cultures that are compatible, but then some are simply not. It's like a marriage. When you are in a country, you are and you must be in a harmonious marriage. And you're right, high trust societies are mostly homogenous and they revolve around common culture. And we are losing that slowly. And I truly believe that America is worth fighting for, particularly for those reasons, because there was that common culture and that common thread that many have, as you said, effortlessly assimilated into. But they came from, again, very specific parts of the world. And today we see something completely different. And one final thing to you, again, given this young Republican element, we both have gone through the university system. What do you see now within universities, especially what we have imported and what is biting us in the back, I have to say, given the backlash that we are just seeing recently in terms of what's happening in Israel and in Palestinian territories?
Right. I think leftist indoctrination in universities is really kind of the pinnacle of a lot of what you're seeing on the left. What they do is they get these young kids, they espouse their worldview to them, and then they're almost foot soldiers that go out into the corporate world and they implement DEI in their boardrooms, in government offices, wherever they are, right? They carry this torch with them. And I certainly saw that. I graduated college fairly recently, 3 years ago now, I think. And I went to the University of California at Los Angeles, UCLA. So very liberal.
Ouch.
Yes, very liberal university. I stuck out like a sore thumb. And it's difficult. It's really tough to be a conservative on these campuses. I can tell you that for sure. Even in social settings, right? Like I joined a sorority and I had sorority sisters who were really awful to me for not getting the COVID vaccine, for supporting Trump. They told me I was anti-feminist and rebuilding the glass ceiling. So I think for students who think like I do, that can almost be radicalizing, right? And it can almost make you an even stronger Republican. And I did too appreciate that I was having to defend my viewpoints. I think that made me a more articulate person. And I think I really understood why I believed what I believe. A lot of these kids that go to schools like Harvard, UCLA, these leftist universities, they're just affirmed. What they believe is never challenged. They never have to debate it or explain why. They just regurgitate what they heard on MSNBC or what they heard their professor say, which I think really makes them a less impressive and intellectual individual. So in the long run, I think if you're a conservative going to these universities, you're going to come out on top. But what's happening now, I think with the Palestinian and Israel conflict has been really eye-opening for a lot of people, just showing how neo-Marxist these professors and students have gotten. And it's really frustrating for me too, as an America First conservative, just to see foreign strife play out on US campuses, right? I hate seeing foreign flags being flown, and foreign flags of nations that are majority Muslim, again, don't believe in our values. We are a Christian nation in the United States. I believe that firmly. And to see a value system that is so opposite that, and frankly, an enemy of that, take place in classrooms is really frustrating and upsetting. But I think, that what we have to do, again, it's always the money, right? Seize the endowments, go after these universities' tax statuses. A lot of them don't pay hefty taxes when they should. A lot of them are ripping off their students, driving up school tuition prices every single year and being unchecked. So I think there's a lot we can do from the legislative branch to kind of counteract them. And then I also just think, we just need to raise awareness to what's happening. We need more videos of professors saying crazy things. Again, like I said earlier, students, get off the sidelines, be an activist, stand up for what you believe in, get involved in the fight. I think there's a lot of students out there that could have a lot potentially to expose. And it's not just the Israel-Palestinian conflict as well. I think that's been a hot topic right now, but for the past, 5 or so years, there has been a lot of anti-white rhetoric on these campuses as well. There has been a lot of hatred for people who are pro-life, for people who have conservative values, or who don't subscribe to the America is a racist country doctrine or dogma. So, I think that it isn't just Israel versus Palestine. There's a lot of hatred for heritage Americans. And I think that we need to stand up against that as well.
That has been an issue, and I can testify to that. In fact, around 2015, 2016, I was a college professor in Chicago. And of course, given that I was not subscribing to the ideology and I would allow my students to have all of the information before they made up their minds, my students would actually come and tell me, Dr. Ravasi, there's professors who are asking us how we voted for a grade. And needless to say, I did not stay at that college setting for a long time, had other things going on, but it's truly, truly disappointing to see how they turned into indoctrination centers. But you brought something up. I want to bring out more of these issues with the foreign flags. And I am an American. I'm an American by choice, even though I was born in Serbia. There was a confirmation of a recently elected judge in New York and in Bronx with the Albanian flag, Kosovo flag, Albanian anthem, Kosovo anthem, and then, of course, the US flag was somewhere there in the background. I find it ludicrous that this is where we are. And I believe my team did send that to you. And I'm admitting my personal bias on this one, why the Albanian and Kosovo flag, but for any other flag, America first, unconditionally.
Absolutely. And I think, our founding fathers are rolling in their graves. If they could see something like this, they would be truly appalled. Dual loyalty is a big issue in the United States that I think a lot of people don't understand. You mentioned you're an American. I'm so happy that you just said I'm an American by choice. I think that's wonderful. I think that's what true great immigrants should always look like and always say. But a lot of people, unfortunately, these days are hyphenated Americans, right? They don't say I'm an American. They say I'm an Albanian American. I'm, a French American, whatever it is. I'm a, Senegalese American. And I think once you say something like that, once you have that frame of reference, the issue that you run into is that you don't put America first. Your kind of posture when you look at the world, your worldview is a little bit tainted, right? You have this kind of loyalty to your homeland. And I think that's what we see with a lot of these foreign aid packages that get sent to, goodness, every single country in the world. What happens is people, they want money for Ilhan Omar, I think, is a fantastic example of that.
Yes.
She cares a lot about her home country of Somalia, wants aid packages for them, and fundamentally, I think, circumvents the America First approach to foreign policy that she should be having as a U.S. Congresswoman, right? So to see this in the courtroom, I think, is just really an affront to our Constitution, to our values. I mean, to think that this person who's being sworn in as a judge is swearing an oath to the U.S. Constitution while playing a foreign national anthem with a foreign flag behind her is just appalling. And this is the kind of stuff, though, that I'm excited to see Republicans start to react to. I think a lot of this stuff hasn't been brought into the mainstream until recently, until this border crisis truly exploded. I think sometimes it does take crisis or a catastrophe for people to kind of wake up and realize how we got here. And how we got here is by putting individuals like that woman in position of power who don't love that they are an American by choice, as you so wonderfully said. So I think that was shocking to me as well. And it got a lot of play on social media. So again, people are noticing it, and they will only continue to notice it as leftists install these individuals all over jurisdictions across America. And you mentioned George Soros earlier. He is really the one that is doing the most damage with our Department of Justice around the country, installing these woke DAs that are crazy radical leftists, don't believe in our values at all, are totally fine politicizing their position to go after conservatives like President Trump, like the January 6th peaceful protesters. So we have to stand up and fight against these people. And that's why winning back the executive is so important, because the DOJ has become really, I think, the focal point of a lot of the Democrats wreaking havoc across the country. So if we can control the DOJ and clean house at the DOJ and really fix their budget, we're going to be golden.
Kingsley, very enlightening conversations, and I have to say, very optimistic. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you.